It's great to have you in, Ifeanyi.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's begin with some of the headlines that stood out, and hopefully perhaps you may have your headlines if you're covering this. Trump talks business with Africa in hopes of countering China. Trump sells shift from aid to trade in White House. Africa seeks Trump support to develop resources. Africa accused Trump of chasing minerals and making their and mocking their presidents, I beg your pardon. So which headline would you say best captures these meetings for you? And if you're covering these meetings in the White House, from what you've seen, what would be the headline for you?
Well, to me, it's just simple. Trump shuns Africa's biggest giants, South Africa and Nigeria have been made formidable marks in terms of investments and the economy, and they are projected to be one of the largest holders of the economy in many years to come. So this is really a huge blow for shunning the giants of Africa. But to be honest, it was expected.
So for you, it's a huge blow. Your headline will be Trump snubs African giants. But you expected it. What would you say, positions you for such expectations?
Well, following markets, I tend to take Trump for his words, right? And even before he entered office, he tweeted and threw a rhetoric about the BRICS formation and threatened to impose sanctions even before he became president-elect after winning the election. So the truth about it is that the dollarization of the world is one of the main sources of United States hegemony, and any formation would lead to less power for the United States. And we all know that if Donald Trump wants something, he wants more power because of the American First region. To be honest, I'm kind of happy he's taking this approach, a more open approach. Maybe we could make some dialogue, because the last time America was unhappy with an African nation, we left to almost 7,000 bombs and then leaving a pile of rubble. And I'm talking about Liberia.
Interesting. But what would you say this suggests about, the strategy in the selection of the invitees? 5 African nations, 4 West African, considering, like you have rightly pointed out, the snub on the African giants. What can you identify as informing this selection, and what does it suggest about US's approach to the continent under Trump?
Yeah, so this shows that the US is taking a more direct approach, unlike the covert approach they usually take. So this selection is definitely countries that have not really taken interest in the BRICS economy or the BRICS currency, because the whole formation of BRICS is to start a new currency within the trading partners. Let's get it clear, by 2015, the global share of GDP in terms of purchasing power parity, the BRICS original countries and even the new ones have surpassed the G7. So I know it's too late to bring stories from my primary school, but if people don't want to play with you, find others that do. And I think that's what the BRICS nations are trying to do, right? Find trading partners that are willing to play ball. And one thing we should always note is that history takes notes. Globalization was something pushed by the West and the unification of almost all countries, but within recent rhetoric, we are seeing this globalization being weaponized. We saw what Russia had to face, and they are currently facing major sanctions because of the conflict in Ukraine. And we saw how the US deals with other parties that they are friendly with. So the weaponization of globalization is something that not just the BRICS nation, or not just Nigeria, but everybody should consider.
Right, and I mean, you're saying deglobalization, that's the word we're hearing thrown around, but we've had people come out to say that perhaps it's not deglobalization, it's just a recalibration of, trade and trade partnerships. It's not necessarily, fine, the US may be the isolationists, right, but everyone else is just rethinking their trade partners. What would you say to that?
Well, I think it's tomato, right? So is a little bit of the same thing, right? So the truth about it is that at first we were pushing about looking at comparative advantage, looking what's the best thing you do and homing down on it and trade among countries. But when the trading currency is now a problem and there are trade barriers or sanctions kept at the slightest width, because I don't see how wanting to trade more with one another can be something so chaos that will mean sanctions or even tariffs. But it's just honestly the power game, and most people like China and Russia have seen this play out and has taken cautious advantage. So, if I'm not moving so forward, if you look at how China has advanced over the years compared to how the United States have advanced, you see that China has not been in any new wars for close to 50 years, but has almost triple or almost 10 times their economy to replace that. Is fantastic. While US, on the other hand, is starting war almost every other day. So there's a different approach and a different dynamics, right? So if you're supposed to be the custodian of peace and custodian of globalization, the rhetoric is a little bit different. But like I said, I prefer the more direct approach when the aggressors or people that are a little bit distasteful of your choices make it clear and simple rather than the covert approach.
Interesting. And I mean, you've highlighted Russia, you've highlighted China, you've highlighted the US as well in this conversation. Some are tagging what's happening now, and especially in relation to Africa, as, you know, the scramble for Africa Take 2.0. Africa versus China. How do you compare their approach? How should Africa also position as some sort of bride that is being wooed by these nations?
So Africa has been a treasure trove from the days of the Bible. The Bible clearly talks about the vast lands of prosperity in the Utopia region. So it has always been a treasure trove. But like you said, how does Africa project to have leverage? If there's one thing Africa is still a huge survival of is their population growth rate, right? We see that one of the problems with the third world nations the developed nations, the fact that they have what we call fourth world problems, right? They have shrinking populations, they have aged populations, and they are looking for every way to reboost the supply. And Africa is not facing that problem. So I think we should zone in on what is really important, look for how this partnership can be strategic, right? Look for how this partnership can take what we have, which is human resources, and harness it. And the government should have a more long-term thinking. Elon Musk is a South African, but he chose to build his companies in America because the infrastructure, the funding, it was easier for him to do that. So what if this African continent became easier to do business? That means we could have multiple Elon Musks and build a massive generation of wealth. Let's not get it twisted. Nigeria is expected to be one of the fifth largest economy by 2027. And this is not a research from me, this is a research from Goldman Sachs. And boasting of $13.1 trillion in 2027. Even by every metric, we still see Africa has much potential, particularly Nigeria as a giant, like you say. But if more investment, more attention is being paid to the detail, particularly in terms of education and welfare, we could have this billion-dollar company, trillion-dollar company by harnessing the intellectual capacity. You see, that is why we see this rhetoric of visa problems or people finding it difficult, because Africa has been brain drained. But the truth is that there's still more brains in Africa that needs to be drained. They can't finish it all because the resource is endless. And that human resource, to me, not oil, not the vast minerals, that is, to me, the most important thing that they can leverage on. And enhancing that human resource, I mean, we could be the giants of the world faster than people think.
Interesting. I mean, the possibilities seem endless. But let's focus on the luncheon, right, that Trump had with these 5 African leaders, those in attendance. What do you make of their representation of the continent at this meeting and their proposals? We had, obviously, the videos coming out, you know, we had some of them wooing him with the fact that, okay, we're going to nominate you for Nobel Peace. Thank you for what you're doing in Africa. Obviously, avoiding a replay of what happened earlier in May with the South African president. But there are different proposals that we are aware of in the media. One of them, of course, supported Trump's efforts to make America great. That's the Liberian president. We had Gabon saying we are not poor countries. We are rich countries when it comes to raw materials, but we need partners to support us and help us. You are welcome to come to invest. Otherwise, other countries might come instead of you. And of course, we had the president of Senegal saying, come and build a golf course in our country. Our country is just 6 hours away from you. So what do you make of how they represented Africa at these meetings and some of the proposals that they may have brought forward?
Well, the representation of Africa was not the best from my own perspective. But for Trump winning the Nobel Peace Prize, I think he's a very qualified candidate given the last Nobel laureate we have seen. So he has fought less wars, homes less people, and led to less deaths. In fact, he has brokered more peace deals than the previous Nobel laureates that we have seen. So if I was to cast a vote, I would tell you that Trump has a strong potential of winning. And moreover, we got somehow of a delay or elevation of what so many people termed the Third World War, when there was escalation with Iran and Israel. And you could see him trying his best to de-escalate the Ukraine and Russia crisis too. So he has also brokered some peace deals even in Africa. He's a really strong candidate, given that Nobel laureates peace prizes to me not up to the highest standards and highest remarks when it comes to peace. But who am I to do?
Interesting. Sounds like you're running a campaign for Trump there. But looking at, you know, an anticipation, we know that aside from these meetings, there's anticipation ahead of Trump's announcement of broader meetings with African leaders in September, United Nations General Assembly, and again, avoiding a replay of May's meetings with Ramaphosa. Should Africa present a unified front, or are we already seeing fragmentation in our dealings, our trade dealings with Africa? Is there anything wrong with, you know, the approach of every man for himself, or should Africa come together, decide on what they want out of a trade deal with the United States?
Well, it's going to be very difficult for Africa to face a united front because, like you said, we have almost 52 countries and we are all having different interests, right? But the point of this is a wake-up call for sustainability and more international. Like, it's harder to trade from one African nation to another African nation, and it's easier to trade from an African nation to Europe. Despite different policies like the parcel and the different deals that have been made, why is it harder for me to trade with my neighbor than it is for somebody across the Atlantic? These are things we need to really settle down and figure out before Africa can come for a united front. The point is, can Africa unite? But economically, aside from the BRICS, Africa should start focusing on doing what it's supposed to do, especially with the African unions or the trade alliances they have brought about ourselves. Because we don't want to be caught out of war and starve. We have people that have been resilient and are still optimistic, right? And we don't want to throw their faith in our government to their peace. So if there's one thing I'm confident about is the negotiation skills of Tinubu, right? Because he's one man that has actually never lost an election and he knows how to pick his battles. So if there's one thing we can hope for, thank God we have someone like him to lead the charge.
All right. Thank you for that, Ifeanyi. As well, looking at what's happening, we have the visa restrictions, we have tariff proposals. How should, and beyond just Africa now, Nigeria approach what is happening and trade relationships with the United States in the context of the tariff proposals and the visa restrictions? What should be our play?
Well, we have seen the rhetoric of the Nigerians calling for reconsideration. But like I said, there's an opportunity to grow internally. There's an opportunity to invest more. I think when Taiwan, for example, has like open no visa restrictions in going to the United States, and that's particularly because of the intellectual property in that small island. They are responsible for the major chip makers and responsible for the vast amount of growth we are seeing in countries like India. When Nigeria starts becoming a hub to pay attention to, we're not going to have problems going anywhere we want. And we can only do that when there is appropriate investment in education and skill. Immediately our leaders find it more difficult to move and find that no matter their position, they're not giving value. Maybe they will look home and do it. So this might be a blessing in disguise if you ask me so.
All right, thank you very much for your thoughts there. Of course, we'll be monitoring how things progress. Dr. Ifeanyi Uba, Head Investment Research, Comercio Partners.